Bruce, you must have something really good too.
Of course I do. It's Bruce Danielson, and I guess I'm here to entertain you too.
This meeting of the Sioux Falls Charter Revision Commission will come to order. Our city clerk's office has helped me with technical difficulties here. So the first item on our agenda for this afternoon will be approval of the minutes of our meeting of August 11, 2021. It has come to my attention that there is a typographical error in those minutes where the minutes refer to one of the meetings for this term being set, item 5A, for February 8, 2021. It should be February 8, 2022. Apart from that change, are there any other issues with the minutes? Otherwise, I would entertain a motion to approve with that one change.
Second.
It's been moved by Commissioner Long, seconded by Commissioner Hayek to approve the minutes of our meeting of August 11, 2021. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Moving on our agenda to new business. We will take up for consideration possible amendments to Charter Article 1, Powers of the City. In the past, when we have considered amendments to different sections, or different articles of the charter, we have gone through section by section within each of the articles in order, and I have opened it up to the members of the Charter Revision Commission to make any proposals. And then we have opened it up to other proposals later in new business under 3D. For now, we will go through. If there are questions, comments, or proposals from members of the commission to any of the articles, or any of the sections of Article 1, please signify by notifying the chair. We'll go through section 1.01, Powers of the City. Commissioner Zalstra.
Mr. Chairman, actually I have no comment on 1.01, but I do have a comment on the preamble.
All right.
You didn't mention that. One of the things that particularly the last round through, which was my first on this commission, was a question was continuing in my mind and kept coming up in the group, which is, what are the criteria by which we evaluate potential amendments? And I don't know why it did not strike me until today when I reread this, that the preamble actually gives us at least two criteria that we could keep in mind. We, the people of Sioux Falls, in order to A, establish a more representative, and B, effective city government. So two of the criteria that I intend to keep in mind this year are, would this proposal make our city government more representative and or more effective? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Further comments, questions, or proposed amendments to the preamble of the city charter? Moving on, any comments on section 1.01, powers of the city? Section 1.02, construction. Section 1.03, intergovernmental relations. Section 1.04, limitations. Section 1.05, new taxes. Seeing no comments, questions, or proposals from the commission under Article 1, powers of the city, we will move to Article 2, city council. Are there comments, questions, or proposed amendments from any members of the commission to Section 2.01, general powers and duties? Section 2.02, composition, eligibility, election, and terms. Section 2.03, mayor.
Oh, Chairman, I have a question, comment on 2.02.
All right, Commissioner DeKenga.
Elections and terms. We do call out, no council member may serve more than 2 full or partial terms consecutively. Do we need to call out how long before they can be reelected? Because at that point, do they need to wait a year before they could run again? Do they need to wait 2 years? Does that need to be clarified?
Question posed by Commissioner Dekenga. Unless there's further comments from the members of the commission, I might kick it over just off the top of your head to the city attorney's office for that question.
Well, what I can tell you is that's never been raised as an issue. It's never been contested. The way it's been interpreted is, of course, you serve your 2 consecutive terms, and then after that, you're eligible. So I don't know if it's a question with a particular fact scenario that you have in mind, or, I mean, in effect, there's a limit that is sort of on its face explains, 2 consecutive terms. And so I think you'll find in other statutes and city ordinances it's comparable, if not identical, language that basically says once you've term limited. In fact, we have in our next election this spring, we'll have 2 term limited counselors. And someone may raise the question, when can I run again, or what if somebody resigns, and whatever. But at this point, once those 2 are completed, on its face, they're eligible for a subsequent term thereafter. So I don't know if that answers your question, or if you had any particular facts in mind.
No, I didn't. That clarifies it. Thank you.
Okay, yeah.
So I'll ask for clarification. So the way it's interpreted now is if you serve your full 2 terms in the city council, you are thereafter forever ineligible from serving again.
No.
Okay,
No, it'd be the,
thank you.
Yes. Okay.
Further questions or comments or proposed amendments, section 2.02?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Hyatt.
I would just make sure that for clarity, that I think it's no different than the way it was envisioned at that time. If a person were running for the legislature and they were out and they'd served their 4 terms, they were term limited, they then, once again, after a term, essentially, a time, election time, they are eligible then to run again if they should so choose. Everybody has their own wishes.
Further items on section 2.02? Section 2.03, Mayor. Section 2.04, compensation expenses. Section 2.05, prohibitions.
Chairman, I have a question on this one.
Commissioner Dekenga, excuse me. I'll get it.
So the question is, or clarification, no former council member shall hold any compensated appointive office or employment with the city until 2 years after the expiration of the term for which they were elected. Does that apply? And then if I look back to 2.2, it says that after their term limit, they are eligible to be a candidate for mayor. So does that being appointed to office or employment with the city, does that also include a mayor's election, or does it not? Is that clear?
It is.
What I'm confused about? Okay.
Now, I'm just, and we'll kick it over to the city attorney's office, I'm just going to go on my knowledge of city history. I've only lived here for 15 years, but it's my understanding that one can run for mayor as soon as you finish up or during the middle of your terms in the city council.
Yeah, what I would, in response to your question, what I would say is that the mayoral role is not an appointive position, nor is it typically defined as employment in this context. Obviously, he's employed by the city, he in this case, but this is a prohibition in effect on transitioning into one of those roles, not a ban on running from, transitioning from council to mayor.
Okay,
This
thank
is
you.
my unresearched.
No, and I would concur with Mr. Koister. It does definitely say appointive office. So I suppose it could be a question if something happened and a new mayor had to be appointed by the council, but we'll save that for another day. Further questions, comments, or amendments, section 2.05, prohibitions. Commissioner Hayek.
I think that you've raised kind of an interesting question, though. And for a fascinating question here, if you look at 202 in the prohibition in terms of consecutive terms, and then you go into 203, that the mayor shall serve as a member of the city council. So is there a need for an exclusion for that member of the city council? And obviously, this has happened many times. No one's ever raised this issue of prohibition. But it's an interesting technicality. So we say the mayor is a member of the city council, and then we say city councilors may not serve. I guess.
Happy to respond to that. If you look at section 2.02 and you go to the second to the last sentence, it does state, however, a council member may immediately thereafter be eligible to be a candidate for mayor.
Oh, thank you. No, that
And if
does
eligible
take
to be
care
a
of it.
candidate, I believe they could be eligible to serve.
Where did you find that?
It's right, it's the second to the last full sentence. The last
Oh, I got it.
clause there.
Got it.
So.
I got it. Thank
There
you.
is also a corollary, there we go, provision in section 3.02 for mayor.
Okay.
The mayor may immediately thereafter be eligible to be a candidate for council member.
Thank you.
Further comments, questions, amendments, section 2.05. 2.06, vacancies, forfeiture of office, filling of vacancies. .07, judge of qualifications. 2.08, city clerk. 2.09, investigations.
Sorry, I do have a question, 2.08.
Commissioner Deckinga.
Thank you, Chairman. As I'm looking at this, the last sentence, keep the minutes of, and we're talking about the city clerk and their responsibilities, keep the minutes of its proceedings and perform such other duties as assigned by this charter or by the council or by state law. It's, some of these seem to be, especially as assigned by council, if I was looking over a contract, this is pretty open to interpretation. Does this need to be clarified further or to have more structure around it?
Just by way of comment for myself, it's my understanding that what would probably happen here is similar to the legislature at the state level setting regulations to govern different agencies of the state. The city council would have the ability by city ordinance adopted to assign specific duties to the city clerk's office. So this provides the overall scope of authority for essentially ordinance making to give those duties to the city clerk's office. But I would also assume there would be some discretionary authority of the city council to assign ad hoc projects to the city clerk's office. Mr. Koistra?
There is, if you go to the city website, one of the things you can find are the job descriptions for all the employees for the city, and that includes one for the city clerk. And so the city clerk actually reports to the council, and so they do provide specific job responsibilities within the clerk's job description, if that answers your question. Certainly can make that available to you.
Oh, go ahead. No, finish.
No, I don't need to see the job description, but thank you. And if it's not an issue for others, I'm okay with it. I don't want to leave things too open-ended. And that was my concern.
Commissioner Hayek?
I would like to go back to 206, vacancies. Because there was an interpretation that occurred at the time, I wrote a letter of resignation from my position on city council in 1998 to be effective at the time that they did the new elections of city council members. And then I was running for mayor, but I wanted that position so people could run for it. And I was told that I had to leave immediately because I had submitted a resignation that I could not set the date. And is that something we need to clarify? And I thought it was actually a good thing for the citizens so that people could know and run.
I would want a little time to look at that fact scenario before I just fly from the seat of my pants on this. If the question is, can someone provide a conditional or a contingent resignation?
Not a contingent. It was to be effective at that time, but I would serve until the new person was elected.
I see. I'd want to take a look at that. We're starting to get into some complexities where it's wise, as you well know, from a legal point of view to ensure that mindful of all the circumstances there.
Gotcha.
Commissioner Hayek, would you like us to add this issue to our spreadsheet of issues to be investigated and considered? Not necessarily as a formal proposal, but something that we have on our docket to...
It might be helpful, if people want to essentially let the public know there will be an opening, they're leaving at that time, but I don't know, do they want to fill it for the 4-month period, or if a person, there are so many people that will take a position, run for another position, but want to not give up the one they have. And so then they would continue as a city councilor if they didn't get that other position. You follow me? That kind of.
So...
We've had people, so they can't have two. So then there's a special election. But what if a person said, so it might be something that we'd want to discuss a little further.
Well, there are already prohibitions, if you look at section .205 regarding, and obviously you're not holding another office at that point, but at some point if someone's fulfilling those duties or are they not, as part of the analysis, I'm sure, for the
Right.
fellow council members. So it gets a little fact-specific, so to speak, or hypothetical even.
Thank you.
But we could consider that.
Well, and again, talking about recent political city history, I believe we've had a candidate recently on the city council who ran for a county office.
Correct.
Okay, so this is an issue that, unless there's an objection from some member of the commission, I would say we should add to our official roster of items for consideration and investigation.
And I don't believe there's any prohibition from them running for one and retaining one, but what if an individual said, you know, I'm going to run for this one, I don't believe it's right that I should keep other people from getting this, and so they're willing to either take the one they are running for and give the other one up.
Well, and yeah, the question may just be reduced to writing, so I make sure we're answering the right question. Because we're maybe talking semantics a little bit in that it's not a resignation, it's maybe a notice of intent to not rerun if still eligible. And so at that point, other candidates would be able to.
Well, it's not, this is midterm. This is 2 years into a 4-year term.
Right.
So,
But you're still intending to perform the duties of the role for the subsequent 2 years? You just intend to run for another office?
no. You have a city councilor
Oh, I see.
who is midterm, the mayoral race comes up, and they either are elected mayor or they would have 2 more years. But they have decided, I'm going to run for mayor, and if I'm not elected mayor, it's not, I don't believe I should be on the council. Maybe they don't agree with the mayor, whatever.
Oh, I see. Okay, so you're city councilor for a year, you decide to run, you're running during that portion, say, hey, if I win, you know, really you're probably triggering appointments, the appointment provisions.
So why
for
not give the
replacing-
public the right to vote?
Right, because as the city clerk, the election official, I don't think that a contingent circumstance like that is one where they could have a simultaneous election for someone who, if they win, becomes a city councilor in the event that the candidate for mayor wins. You know what I mean? And
Okay.
so you're probably into appointment of a new one in the event that a councilor would become mayor, and then that gap may exist for a period of
Just
time. but
appoint.
You have
Okay.
quorums, and so. But if a question remains, happy to field it. Just want to make sure I'm answering the right one, so.
Well, we will add that one to our roster of items. Further comments on Commissioner Hayek's question? Okay. I believe we left off with section 2.08, City Clerk. Further comments, questions, or proposals? Section 2.09, Investigations. Section 2.10, Independent Audit. Section 2.11, Procedure. Section 2.12, Action Requiring an Ordinance. Commissioner Zylstra. That's all right. So then we will skip the balance of the Commissioner Zylstra can't, no, I'm just kidding. Section 2.13, Ordinances in General. Section 2.14, Updating the Code of Ordinances.
That's an interesting issue in that that time has come almost. And do we need to, we're talking, it'd be 2024, correct? Or have we,
Yeah, 20 years, 2012 was the last time we updated.
okay, it was done in 2012?
Yeah.
Not a problem then.
Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Zylstra.
Okay, I found my place, and actually, my comment, and if I indulge the chair will indulge me, I think this, in general, these are just comments, I don't have a proposal. This is a fascinating part of the charter, because it raises the question, who has priority in directing the affairs of the city? The council or the mayor? In my 9 years that I've been living in Sioux Falls, I hear that coming up quite often. And we had some proposals in our last round too, to maybe help clarify some of that. I've finally, in my own mind, narrowed it down to this question. Do we have a mayor who is also a city manager? Or do we have an elected city manager who also serves as mayor? Specifically, do we have an elected leader of the city whose duties include managing the affairs of the city within the policy guidelines adopted by the council? Or do we have a council elected to govern the city and a mayor who is elected to carry out their direction? And the interesting thing is, as I reread this section, you can find wording in the charter that sort of fits with either answer. 2.01, all powers of the city shall be vested in the city council. That's the first sentence. Makes it sound like the council has priority. But the second sentence says, the council shall act as a part-time policy-making and legislative body, avoiding management and administrative issues. Almost sounds like the mayor has priority. Similarly, in 2.11, under voting, Robert's Rules of Orders typically says a chair will vote whenever it makes a difference, or may vote whenever it makes a difference. This says the mayor shall vote and only to break a tie. So, yes, the mayor may only vote to break a tie, unlike Robert's rules, which says a mayor or our chair can create a tie and thereby defeat a motion. Or is it the mayor who shall vote to break a tie? Because Roberts would say the mayor may vote. And this says the mayor has to. So again, we're going both directions. And last round, we spent quite a bit of time talking about, is the mayor a member of the council? Because it says in 2.03, the mayor is a member of the council. And then but in 2.02, it says the mayor and 8 members of the council. And usually, when it talks about members of the council throughout here, it means the 8, excluding the mayor. So we've already touched on that a bit today. Is the mayor a member of the council? Yes. Is the mayor the same as all the other council members? No. And so in similarly, this is my last one. In Article 2, the council is specifically told not to interfere with the mayor's work. Sounds like the mayor has priority. But in 2.09 and 2.12, the council is given tremendous oversight authority over all aspects of the administrative structure of the city. And in 2.12, particularly under number 1, they can even eliminate any city department, any city office, any city agency. So there again, it sounds like the council has the strength. Now, when that question was raised, who has the priority? Last year, or 2 years ago, we had one of the original drafters of this document come to us. And we raised the question to him, did you decide to have a strong mayor or a strong council? And he said, both. It was deliberate that we would have a strong mayor and a strong council, which is somewhat quite different from some of these models that they were given to evaluate. So what we have, as I see it, in this charter is a balance between aggressive leadership by the mayor and reflective consideration by the council. And both have to go together. And without making any judgment on it, it seems to me yesterday's council meeting and the major issue they had there, that's exactly what happened. The mayor had presented a very aggressive proposal regarding medical marijuana, and the council gave very aggressive, reflective consideration and finally came up with a, not unanimous, but a consensus position. So I think this is important for us to keep in mind as we go through proposed revisions. Any revision that would destroy that balance, saying we have both a strong mayor and a strong council, would be something that, in my mind, goes beyond a charter revision and becomes a charter rewrite. Now, do we need to rewrite the charter? That's another question. But this body is a charter revision body. And so as I listen to proposals throughout the year and reflect on any I might bring myself, I certainly will use this also as one of my criteria for evaluating whether in fact it maintains the council-mayor balance.
Mr. Chairman?
Commissioner Hayek.
I'm not quite sure. I'm confused because I thought we did have a strong mayor, strong council form of government, and that was what was intended. Is that not what we have?
No, indeed. My point was, you can look at it both ways. So people who think we should have a strong council will take certain sentences. People who will think we should have the strong mayor will take other sentences. But what we have is both, a strong mayor and strong council. It's a balance. It was deliberately put into the charter that way. And I at least think that's one of our responsibilities in evaluating proposed changes, is whether it maintains that balance.
Thank you.
Sorry for the, I hope that shorter answer made a lot more sense than my long answer.
Further comments? I would just point out, and I thank Mr. Zylstra for his comments on this. If you look beyond Article 2 of the Charter, well, actually, we'll start with Section 2.01, which Mr. Zylstra read the opening language of. It definitely does say all powers of the city shall be vested in the city council. It does go on, though, to immediately say except as otherwise provided by law or this charter. And then if you look at Article 3, I think what the framers of the charter were going for here is kind of summed up there in Section 3.01. The executive and administrative power of the city shall be vested in a mayor. So at the end of the day, I think Commissioner Zylstra is absolutely correct that what we have is a strong council and a strong mayor. I do think the framers were intending to make it clear to city government that all executive and administrative power shall be with the mayor's office. The city council shall be the policy-making, deliberative body and shall set the policy for the executive and administrative powers of city government. So I think what we have, to Commissioner Zylstra's point, is similar to the U.S. Constitution or our state constitution in South Dakota, a separation of powers dynamic with some checks and balances. The authority of the mayor's office, administrative and executive, would be limited by the powers granted legislatively by the city council. So I think, to your point, I would agree with you that they are different powers, but each powerful in their different roles. I don't know if you would agree with that or not, but I think that's kind of the beauty of the way this is framed, excuse me, and I think it also mirrors beautifully our U.S. Constitution. Further comments? All right, so we have gotten through Article 2 at this point for commission discussion. Under item 3B on the agenda, we have sub 1, formal recommendation by Mike, and I hope I'm pronouncing this right, Mike Soteric. If you'll please come forward, Mr. Soteric. The commission did receive paperwork from Mr. Soteric in advance of the meeting. In his paperwork, Mr. Soteric very kindly annotated in red line format for the commission his specific proposal, what that would look like. And he also provided a very detailed summation and explanation of his proposal, the merits, advantages, and policymaking reasons why the commission should potentially adopt this amendment to the charter. So I will say for my part, I truly appreciate that, and I'm happy to give you the floor. This is not public input, so unless there's an objection from the members of the commission, you may have the floor, and we will, I'd ask you to be respectful of the public time, but we will not limit your time because you're on the agenda.
Okay.
Thank you.
First of all, I'd like to thank you for giving me the opportunity to put this on the agenda. It's something I've been thinking about for probably 2 or 3 years. A good friend of mine raised the question to me a few years ago. His name is Bill Neese. We got talking one night about the console and how it works and everything. He just basically posed a question to me one time. He just asked, why do we have an even number of council members? And what's the real purpose of at-large representatives? And it got me thinking. The more I got talking about it and it got thinking about it, it really got me thinking what the difference between the local districts are versus at-large. The more I thought thinking about it, some of what he's taught me it makes a lot of sense. If we have a strong mayor, if we are to have a strong mayor type of government, and we wanted a separation of powers, should not the council have an odd number chairs? And then whether or not the mayor breaks the tie or not, he still has veto power. So my thinking behind this whole concept was addition by subtraction, get rid of one at large, and then create 2 additional city districts. That would put it more in line with how we district the state. 1 vote for every 25,000. In this case, it'd be about 28,000. And then you'd have not an odd with the 2 additional at-large reps. You'd have a 9-member charter council, and then the mayor should never have to break a tie, and it would force him to agree to it or disagree with any agenda through the power of the pen. If that's how you look at it. And then another thing, I believe this is something we should do every 10 years. Every 10 years we do as we district the city. Look at some of the issues we're having with the central district. More and more people are coming to Sioux Falls. They're migrating more to the outside edges. What's happened to that central district? And my whole idea of giving downtown its own district is if we take away one at large, the business district and the downtown kind of commingles with the rest of the town. It really shapes what we really want to do as a town. And I think you can see that as over the last 5-10 years, how we really use downtown as that focal point. Why not give them a voice on this body? And then that sets up your 7 local districts. And that really breaks down your central area of town into 3 separate little sections. However, we divide up the precincts is a matter of how the council wants to break that down. I kind of throughout this whole process, which was kind of fun, I was kind of thank Carrie for helping me along the way, but kind of been paying attention to how the districting commission, and I kind of seen some of the issues they're having with it, trying to keep the central together. And I think breaking that central up into 3 categories and having the 4 outer chambers, I think it would be a lot easier to expand the corners of this town. If you look at how the city is growing, we can't go much south other than going east and west. And the north is kind of tapped out by Renner. So we're really going to be pushing the city east-west to begin with. So what's going to happen with the central district over the next 10 or 15 years? I think the next 10, 15 years is going to be a telling sign how the city really grows. And if we want to stay to the, if we want to what you were saying, big number, we really want to stress separate powers, give council very distinct power versus the mayor. I feel having this concept actually creates that separation, and it really fine tunes city government. I like to say, I think Stacy uses the word a lot, substantial. I don't believe this concept really substantially changes anything. It's just a slight change, just giving the people more voice. And then that's kind of how I kind of lay down the concept. So.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks.
Anything further?
No, that's all.
Okay. I'm going to open it up to questions for you from the commissioners, if you're willing to answer just some questions.
Sure.
Any questions from the commissioners? Commissioner Zoustra.
Oh, thank you, first of all, for this presentation, and found it very, very intriguing and stimulating. It got other thoughts going in my mind. You talk about maybe about 25,000. I found it interesting. That got me going back to the original population at the time the charter was made. And then it was about 20,000 per district. So is that an important part of your concept, that you want representatives who would be closer to a more manageable population base?
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm trying to. That's exactly the angle I'm trying to get. And I'm glad you brought it up. And what is it? 91, we had 20,000 per district. Now we're pushing towards 40,000 per district. And then I think the bigger the districts get, the farther away the reps get from the people. And I think to get a more defined representative approach to the government, I would think you would want to keep those districts as small as possible.
Further questions from the commission? I did just have one, Mr. Zaterik. It doesn't look like it from your red line version, but from your comments a minute ago, would you propose removing the mayor from the council and/or taking away his or her power to break ties on the council?
No, I wouldn't propose I believe the mayor is, as the at-large, I believe he's the main body of the government. It's his role. He's elected by the people. I think he has a voice on the council.
Okay.
I would even give him more of a voice, I think, as we seen last night, I think putting him in star, that was a pretty interesting little dialogue they had. I think giving him I think he deserves that voice on the council.
Okay, great. Commissioner Zoustra.
Just to follow that up, because I had understood that you wouldn't necessarily, you wouldn't take away the mayor's right to vote to break a tie, but with an odd number of commissioners, it's less likely to occur.
Yeah, that was my goal, to put the tiebreaker vote in the hands of the council itself, and just the mayor acts, at that point, basically acts as a mediator, keep the meeting on schedule. I mean, at the end of the day, his votes are really in his office.
Okay, thank you.
Further questions? Commissioner Hayek.
I think it's very interesting. Are you aware of other cities that embrace this form of government?
There's a few. I can't name them off the head. I didn't really research it, but I was kind of patterning it more after the legislature and the House, U.S. House, where they have odd numbers in the House chamber.
But I'm kind of curious, because I was kind of trying to do a little quick research here and it doesn't work on the phone. In terms of, as you think about the size a district needs to be, then at what point does it just become prohibitive because you just need to have so many. So are there some model cities that have like employed this, and how have they embraced it? Do you know of any cities that?
No, not offhand.
Okay, thank you.
Further questions? Mrs. Jeterik, thank you very much. I will say again that we really appreciate you submitting everything so cleanly and thoroughly in advance. I was able actually to come up with a number of topics for research, and I will actually ask the assistance of the city attorney's office in that, and we as a commission can hopefully look through those. And that would be, as part of this proposal, if we could get a report, and maybe this is the city clerk's office, on census data for Sioux Falls by decade since the charter was first adopted. B, and I think the answer to this is actually in the charter, and that is that it doesn't really exist. How would the process work for redistricting the city council? And would we have to amend the charter? And I think the answer is probably yes. And that brings me to C, how do other cities handle this issue? And Commissioner Hayek has asked that question already. Do they redistrict? How do they add additional districts based on population growth? Is that something that many cities do routinely? D, do we have an idea? I don't think it's clear from the charter with the reasons why at-large council seats were written into the charter at the time of the framing versus just doing everything based on districts. Was part of the thought for that the concept of exactly what Mr. Zeterik's brought forward, that based on population growth, you've got some that are beholden to all of the electors of the city. So I'm just trying to, if we have any legislative history, so to speak. And then finally, are there state laws that would limit or set the authority of the city when it comes to redistricting, changing the membership and types of membership on the city council, et cetera? From the other commissioners, I apologize for putting all that out there. Anything else you'd like researched or considered as part of our continuing investigation and consideration of Mr. Zeterik's proposal? Commissioner Long.
Thank you. Sorry about that. Let me think out loud for a minute or two. The state legislature is now going through the process of, or beginning the process of redistricting. And of course, there's a constitutional mandate that requires that. I seem to recall that there are some constitutional principles that specifically require that require at least redistricting to be sensitive to the voting rights of minority groups. And so in the larger context, the question I would have is there a regular requirement by cities generally to redistrict if they're growing, or the reverse of that, if they're not growing, if they're declining? And is that simply driven by a minority group that would bring litigation and cause that, or is it automatically, or is there some more general constitutional principle that would require it? I mean, I understand why state legislatures redistrict, and I understand why the national legislature redistricts, but would those same constitutional principles govern, for example, school boards, or city councils, or irrigation district, the list goes on. And so, for example, it looks like this charter requires 8 city councilmen. What is the magic of that number? What is the basis for that number? As the city grows, if we attach significance to 30,000 people in a district, it seems inevitable that as long as the city continues to grow, then there's going to be an automatic or mandatory requirement at some point for additional council people. Is there magic to 30,000? Is there? And again, I wish I knew the answers to these things, but I honestly don't, and it just, that's what I was thinking about when I was listening to the commentary. Because if there is something constitutional or statutory about the number 28,000 or 30,000, then the city has grown by what, 40,000 or thereabouts in the last 10 years? If it continues at that rate, then it's inevitable that you're going to have more council people and at least mandate a revision of the portion of the charter which limits the council to 8 councilors. The flip side of that is if 8 councilors is the magic number, then you're periodically going to have to redistrict. And so I don't know the answers to either of those questions, but I think we ought to task the city attorney with
Mr. Chair?
giving us his opinion at some future time when he's had an opportunity to think about it.
Commissioner Hayek?
Well, I think you raised a real good point. And it's interesting, I was kind of grabbing a little information here, and Minneapolis has 13 city councilors, each paid $106,000, but Denver has 13 city councilors. And the difference with the stated population is 300,000 people. So at what point is it representative? Denver with 13 city councilors, 705,000 people, and of course, some of these statistics I'm getting from my little telephone, so we all know how accurate that probably isn't. But so then what is, as you say, the magic number? Is so that we ensure that those people, so I think you raised a very good point, and I think your presentation was very, very well presented, and I thank you for how well put together it all was. So something we can at least look at.
Well, and just to follow up on that point,
Please.
the U.S. Congress is limited to 435 members. And so one of the challenges is that some states are going to lose Congress people, and some states are going to gain. And that's because somewhere along the line there is a cap of 435, and I forget where it's at, but there is a hard cap. Now, is 8 a hard cap in Sioux Falls? If that's true, then periodically you're going to have to redistrict. If 30,000 is a hard cap, then periodically you're going to have to redistrict. But if neither of those things are caps, then I'm not sure then what happens. But it seems you ought to have some caps in there somewhere.
So to the point, and something was, Commissioner Long, I appreciate your comments because, for many reasons, one of which is because it was ringing bells in the back of my mind. And yeah, Article 6 of the Charter actually sets forth in 6.02 the entire redistricting process. And that in sub A.
Which I haven't read yet, which I
Well,
will
so I'm
confess.
saying, I read it a ways back, which is why it took me a little while. There shall be 5 city council districts as sub A. And then this sets forth the process, which I believe we are going through at this time in the city of Sioux Falls, of redistricting.
Yes, it is occurring now, and it's aligned with the census. So it actually was delayed this year because of the delay in the census numbers due to COVID. So the process, districting commission has been meeting and will continue to do so now that the numbers are available.
And I'm also assuming that Mr. Zeterik was way ahead of us on this. Actually, he was way ahead of us on this because his proposal would have been section 6.02 of the charter, including sub A, creating 7 set council districts with 2 designated at-large. So I think that answers one of the questions that I had posed for our consideration, which is how would we go about changing the number of set council districts as opposed to at-large? And we would have to change that. I guess I would just modify my question some, or one of my questions some. So do other cities open up the process of redistricting to include every 10 years the potential creation of brand-new council districts given increases in population? I know that there are cities out there like the Windy City, Chicago, that have 100 or more council seats. So we're getting to legislative proportions, or legislature proportions. But Mr. Zeterik, I'll open it up to you. If there's anything that has been said by any, or asked by any of the members of this commission that you would like to address or respond to, I'll give you the floor again, since this is your proposal.
Yeah, something that Larry brought up, what's the magic number? I think if you go, my whole basis of, I attached some of my, I find a lot of my basis grounded in those Federalist Papers, and it was a very hot topic. It was a very interesting discussion they had back in way 200 years ago. I don't think they've really had a magic number, and I think they basically, as the country would grow, they just automatically assumed that the U.S. House would expand and contract as it went. I think something Larry brought up was, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, the House is capped at, I think the people have one for every 700,000 people, which that kind of aligns with the 435. I've often wondered, why do they cap it such when the population has grown so much? I mean, it's almost as if you need more districts. But then if we go by 1 for 30,000 people, you'd have a 12,000 seat house. But so at some point you probably have a hard number there. But I think that if you look at based on what the founding principles were, they wanted these legislative bodies to kind of grow and expand as, like Larry said, as the population goes up and down. So I think that's kind of where I draw my basis from.
Okay,
So,
thank you. Further comments, questions? Seeing none, Mr. Zeterik, thank you very much. We appreciate it. This will go firmly on our agenda, our roster of proposals, and we will continue to investigate, gather information, and consider that proposal. So, thank you. We will now move to agenda item 3C, consideration of commission questions, comments, proposals on Article 3 of the Charter. We'll begin with Section 3.01, Executive Power. Are there questions, comments, or proposals for amendment from the members of the Commission to Section 3.01? Section 3.02, Election and Qualifications of Mayor. Section 3.03, Mayor's Duties and Responsibilities. Section 3.04, Mayor's Power to Veto Legislation. Seeing no comments, questions, or proposals from the members of the Commission on Article 3, we will move to item 3D, other proposals submitted in advance of this meeting unrelated to the articles under consideration above. Do we have any such proposals? Nope.
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Zylstra?
I believe that Mr. Zuterich had several items too that go beyond these sections. But I would suggest, and I don't think I have to make it a formal proposal, that we consider all of those together with what you've already asked to be placed on the further agenda.
Any objection from the members of the commission? Mr. Zuterich, are you okay with that? Mr. Zuterich having confirmed his acceptance, we will consider his proposal as one package, noting for the record, as Commissioner Zylstra indicates, that Mr. Zuterich's proposal would make amendments to Section 2.02 under Article 2, as well as Section 6.02 under Article 6, and Section 9.05 under Article 9. Anything further under item 3D? Seeing none, item 3E is simply the list of formal recommendations for revisions to the Sioux Falls Charter to be maintained. That was part of the agenda packet for this meeting. We have already added to the list August 13, 2021, Mike Zuterich, City Council composition and districting onto that agenda. We will now turn, anything further under any of the items for new business? Okay, we'll move to item 4, public input. We will invite proposals from the public to amend any section of the charter. We would also invite public input as to any proposal for an amendment to the charter that has come forward. At this point, that would be limited to Commissioner Hayek's questions, as well as Mr. Zuterich's proposal.
This isn't public input?
Yes, sir?
Oh, it is. How do you turn this on? Oh, thank you.
Mr. Arisman, please proceed.
Scott Erisman, Sioux Falls. I'll go through these quick, and then if I have time left, I will brief.
Mr. Arisman, I apologize. I will, it's my understanding that you have more than one proposal for amendment to the
Yes.
charter. Is that correct?
Yeah.
I will give you the liberty, unless there's an objection from the commission, of giving you the full 5 minutes for each of your 3 items, if that
Okay.
is agreeable.
I probably won't need it, but thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Okay, the first one is application for TIF will only be accepted for projects that will eliminate blight, build density in the core, and simultaneously provide affordable and workforce housing. Home Rule Charter allows the city to be stricter than state law. My number 2 one is general public input will be at the beginning of every city public meeting, including boards and commissions, and will have a limit of 5 minutes per speaker and no limit on the number of speakers except at the discretion of the chair of the meeting. Number 3, every director or department head must be a Sioux Falls resident or become one within 30 days of hire start date. Current directors are exempt, only applies to new hires appointed by the mayor and city council. Now, for the first one, I believe that state law changed. It used to be that you could only do TIFs for blight, affordable housing. There was a narrow scope. And it changed, and now it seems like they're using them for private financing, parking ramps, condominiums. When TIFs first came out, if you ever read a lot about them or study them, they were for very narrow things to help the public. They're being extremely abused in this community, I think. I think this is why I think that the public should have a say in how they're being used. If it was up to me, I would say to vote to get rid of them. I know that would never pass. I don't even know if this one would pass, but I can tell you that I just don't think they're being used the way they should be appropriately. I know that when Costco came to town, they never got a TIF. They refused the TIF. They don't believe in them. They believe it takes money away from the school districts. It increases taxes on everybody. And I just don't believe that condominiums, parking ramps, and bond funding should be included in a TIF. It should be very narrow. It should clean up land, and it should provide affordable housing. That's it. I believe that the citizens should, like I said, don't know if it would pass or not, but I think the citizens should be able to find a way to wrangle in the abuse of TIFs that we do have. The other problem I also have is that the city council has full power on TIFs, even though it affects the county and the school district. And of course, the tax, you have a valuation when you have a TIF. A valuation has to be made up. It's made up by the rest of us, higher property taxes. And then also, when the city does a TIF within the city, I don't know if you understand this too, that money has to be made up with the school district by the state. So that means somebody living in Millbank or Freeman or Scotland, South Dakota, they have to supplement the Sioux Falls School District's valuation because we gave a TIF to someone building a parking ramp. Now, I would argue with someone in Millbank, they probably wouldn't agree with that too much. That's why I think the scope needs to be extremely narrowed. I wouldn't even mind adding to this that financing cannot be included in the TIF. It has to be directly for cleaning up blight and directly for building the housing. General public input. This is something that has bothered me for quite a while, and that is because the city has no standard at their meetings. I don't know how many different board meetings or commission meetings that you go to, but they're not always held here. They're held in all kinds of places. Some of them have the beginning. Some of them have it at the end. Some of them have it in the middle. Some of them don't do it at all, which is against state law, by the way. You have to have public input at every meeting. There's been a couple of meetings that have actually been canceled at the beginning of the meeting in Sioux Falls. This is very recent, because they didn't have public input on the agenda. I believe this is a way to standardize it. You make it real simple. Any meeting, and this is according to state law, you have to have public input. But within the city of Sioux Falls, that should always be at the beginning of the meeting, and it should always be 5 minutes. Now, the discretion of the chair, I believe, is in case, 100 people show up. Well, it's going to get repetitive. So the chair should have the power to limit that, the number of speakers. But some people have always asked me, well, why do you think it should be at the beginning of the meeting? Well, I'll tell you why. You work for the citizens. I don't care if you're a volunteer, you're elected, you're paid, you work for us. That means the citizens are number one priority business. The citizens should always come first, and this is why public input should always be at the beginning of the meeting. When people are here to do business, they always say, well, one of the reasons we put public input at the end is because the business people want to get their stuff done. Well, they're here to make money. That's why they showed up. That's why they're asking for a license. That's why they're coming and asking for a rezone. They're doing business. Citizens come here on their own time. They don't get paid to show up to be here. They're already paying your wages, or if you're being paid. And public input should always be at the beginning. Every single meeting, it should just be common thread. Whoever puts the agendas together for any meeting should just be automatic. 5 minutes at the beginning of the meeting, public input. I don't know if this would pass. Maybe some citizens disagree with me and think it should be at the end. I don't know. The third one, I do believe the citizens would pass. And the reason I'm bringing this up is I'll say at the end. Elected officials have to be citizens of Sioux Falls. I mean, who would argue against that? Now, I know that there's some, you'd have to correct me on this if I'm wrong, but I think that you can serve as a county state's attorney and not live in the county. There's certain things where you don't have to follow those rules. I also think this is important with public safety. I think anybody who's a city director and you're dealing with public safety, you really should be living within the boundaries of Sioux Falls. That's pretty much every city director, in my opinion, except for maybe like library or something like that. Public Works, Health Director, City Attorney's Office, Fire, Police. And the last thing is just common courtesy. The citizens of this town who live here are paying taxes, and we're paying your wage. Just out of common courtesy, you should probably live in the town and pay the taxes in this town since we're paying you your wages. A lot of cities require this. It's not uncommon. It's not crazy. It's not something I pulled out of my butt. It is pretty common practice in a lot of cities across the country. I wouldn't go as far as regular city employees who are not in management, just because I know that it would be hard to get maybe some people to work for the city. I believe the last time I checked, about 25% of city employees do not live in Sioux Falls. This was from a mailing list that I saw probably about 10 years ago. And like I said, the reason I talk about how people would vote on this is because it was once said by this commission that we don't like putting things on the ballot because they almost always would pass. Well, I don't believe that. I don't agree with that at all. Like I said, my first two proposals, I don't know, they could be voted down. I couldn't tell you. Maybe people completely disagree with me on them. I don't think they're controversial. I just think they're people's opinion on stuff. So I have an issue with that. But I also believe the CRC's real job is not to determine whether something is appropriate. That's an opinion. That's a personal opinion. You weren't asked to be on this board for your personal opinion. You were asked to be on this board to determine if something is illegal and is legal. Can it be fit into the charter? Can it be voted on? And thirdly, as a citizen, I don't believe it's my job to create the ballot language. My job is to keep it simple, give you my proposals like I just did within a few minutes, and you can determine if these are appropriate and if they should be on the ballot and if people should be allowed to vote on them. I'm not a city attorney. I don't have a law license. I'm a regular citizen who came here on my own time. And I have a real issue with the customer service in the city. And I'm not gonna start with you guys. I'm just gonna say in general, I've felt that over the past, well, quite a while, that there seems to be this with boards and city employees and especially elected officials, that we're just not going to help the citizens. We're not going to help them navigate through the system. We're not going to give them we're going to tell them anything legally. We're not going to help them when they go file ethics complaints. We're not going to, try to help them find the articles where these belong. We're just going to let them float around there on their own, they can look foolish on their own, and we're just going to say, we're not going to really help you. So I'm just going to make this simple. I'm going to give you guys this when I leave here. You can do whatever you want to with it. I would hope that you would look at it. I would hope that you would try to find a way that this can be legally put on the ballot, because maybe I have a lot of stuff wrong with this that it couldn't be legally put on the ballot. But I think these are very simple. I actually had about 12 amendments, and I slowly whittled it down to 3. Because I do believe that these legally can be on the ballot. Thank you very much.
Mr. Harrison, while we have you up here, are there questions of Mr. Arisman from the members of the commission on his proposals? Mr. Arisman, have you provided a copy of that to the city attorney's office? I had just a couple questions for you.
Mr. Chair, just be mindful at public input, this is not an agenda item. So discussion on the topics, they can be added to the list, but they're not. I mean, there isn't a responsive component to public input typically. So
I believe that's up to the commission, to tell you the truth. I've been to several meetings where boards have talked back and forth at public input. And that's up to I believe that's up to the chair. In my opinion, I think that's up to the chair.
Is there an objection, Commissioner Zylstra?
Well, I think this is a question we will have to ask ourselves, and so I would like Mr. Ehrman's response. My first reaction is, whatever value these have, they sound more to me like initiatives. And Section 6.03 of the Charter says the power of initiative and referendum is reserved. So you could bring these as ballot initiatives. Why do you see these as charter issues?
I would agree with you on number one with the TIFs. Definitely. That could be an initiative. I think the other two are very simple. One is meeting structures. I don't know what article that would be in. That's just simple meeting structures. That's no different than us voting on a word change or a change. So public input, that's just, Human resources has to do with director appointments. I also believe that shouldn't be an initiative. That's just a simple change in the charter, basically saying, it probably would add a sentence actually, basically saying once you're appointed as a director, you have to live in the city. That's what I think.
So, Mr. Ehrman, just a couple of questions from me on your specific items here. Number one, your item number one, how would you want to define core?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that. I didn't want to get, I kind of thought about that. There is a section, well, this is what I often tell people. Core and proper, I think the last time I checked by the city, I mean, you'd have to talk to the, CIS department or something like that. But I've often defined it as Russell Avenue, 41st Street, Cleveland, and Kiwanis. So that's your core. That's what I've seen in the past as what the city considers Sioux Falls proper, is what they call it. Now, I don't know if that's expanded, it might have, but that's what I would consider the core. And it has to do with building density in the core, which I believe is the number one economic thing that the city needs to do. I think we need to stop building in cornfields. I think it's silly and a waste of money. Yeah.
On item number two, how would you propose the discretion granted to the chair of any board, commission, or government body be written, limited, defined?
The city council does it quite often during information. I've seen the chairs do it quite often. Very recently, they do it a lot. Basically, it has to do with repetition. They basically say, we're not going to limit the speakers, but if you're starting to get repetitive, then we're going to start. So yeah, it's up to the discretion of the chair. Dealing with repetitiveness, I guess is how I would say it.
And then what would the commission, how should the commission draft your proposed amendment to deal with those members of the public who would want to respond to discussion items that take place at the meeting? If it was mandated to take place at the beginning, what if they wanted to respond to something that was said during the course of the meeting? At that point, they wouldn't be able to comment.
I don't think you'd have to change anything. I think that's already laid out. I'm pretty sure it is. It's already laid out that discussion items, whatever meeting it is, whether it's a city council or whatever, that's always said at the beginning of the meeting, and Ann's shaking her head. It's always said at the beginning of the meetings, if you have regular items, this is how we handle them. All I'm saying is, by state law, you have to have public input at every meeting. There's always going to be public input. Whether this gets put on the ballot and changed or not, we're always going to have public input. All I'm saying is that general public input, and I call it general public input, has to be at the beginning of the meeting and has to be 5 minutes for every city meeting.
So I guess the bigger overarching question is, what if the commission, in acting on your proposals, drafts formal amendments that will go on our roster that are, in your opinion, the opposite of what you intended, or different from, or not, not quite what you intended? I'm just trying to figure out how we can logistically deal with that kind of problem.
That's your decision. That's what you're here for. That's what you're appointed to do. That's your decision. I guess I can't fathom that you would take an idea of mine, which I think are very simple. I don't think they're complicated. I don't think that they take pages and pages to explain. I don't see you going, yeah, Mr. Harrisman, he really wanted it at the beginning of the meeting, the public input. Well, let's just put it to the end. I just don't believe you'd do that. I would hope you wouldn't do that. Like I said, there's probably a lot of legal challenges with, especially the TIF thing. And as Mr. Zeichler brought up, I should probably be an initiative, and he's probably right. But on the other two, I feel those are pretty simple charter language. I don't think you'd have to strike out anything. I think you could simply put them into the charter. That simple, real easy. I know there's plenty of spots probably in there that talk about public input. But you wouldn't have to go against state law or anything because it's already required. You're putting I call it a standard in the meetings. So it doesn't matter if you're, the plumbing board or the zoning board, whatever. You all do it at the beginning.
Commissioner Hayek?
I would make a motion that we take the recommendations from Mr. Ershman, the application for TIF in terms of the restrictions he would like to place on them, the general public input in regard to the beginning of the meeting, and the residency of any director or department head as an item for our next agenda to determine whether or not they are appropriate for this commission to have, or whether they are maybe something that should be done within, I guess I see 212, but we could discuss that later. So I'd make the motion that we place those on the agenda for discussion as to whether they are appropriate for our commission.
Okay, it's been moved by Commissioner Hayek that we place this as an agenda item at our next meeting, the 3 proposals from Mr. Harrisman. Is there a second? Seconded by Commissioner Deckinga. Any further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, the motion is to place these 3 items on the agenda for our next meeting. All those in favor will please vote aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you.
We are still open for public input. Mr. Zokites. Thank you. Please proceed.
Hi, everybody. I'm David Zokitis, and I'm a regular presenter at Sioux Falls City Council. And usually I wear more than a T-shirt, but oh well. In support of Scott's TIF proposal, I looked back on some of my City Council presentations, and on March 2nd of 2021, I talked about agenda item 34, which was the Foundation Park TIF. During my presentation, I defined a TIF. It's tax increment financing. Property is taxed at the current unimproved rate for a long time, and then the development's supposed to lead to higher property tax later. Essentially, a TIF project borrows planned in higher property taxes. Okay, and there's some legal requirements that are at the state level, but there's some real problems with the TIF and how they move money around. The traditional rationale for TIF was urban renewal to promote redevelopment of blighted or slummy areas, and maybe to support job growth in a slighted area. But, there's not a whole lot of that going on at Foundation Park. It's not a slum. Okay. The tax impacts are that you reduce future funds for state, city, and county schools because of lower property taxes, but you increase expenses because you've got more people coming in. So that's not the way to do things. Okay. And one of the main beneficiaries of a TIF is the builders who are putting up new stuff there, the bankers and big business. But I think we should, with TIFs, we need to subsidize high-paying jobs instead of the low-paying jobs that we currently subsidize at Foundation Park. The real problem with the TIF is that you take money away from schools and give it to big businesses. Not what we want to do. Now, the question really is, where do you want to redefine a TIF so that it only works with blighted areas? A lot of places you could do that. You could do that at the state level and change state law back to the way it used to be when it was drafted. You could do that at the charter level, maybe at the ballot initiative level. And you could also do it with elected representatives who are more aware of who they should be working for and spend less of their effort subsidizing big builders and big developers. So those are some of the questions. Why we subsidize big builders at the expense of education with the TIF, and how do you stop that? Well, there's a lot of different places you could change state law, you could change the charter, you could change city laws, and you could change who you elect as council members and the mayor. So that's a good question for this commission to consider. How do you get TIFs to be better for the people and not so biased towards big business and big developers?
Thank you, Mrs. Skaitis. Further public input? Any further public input? Seeing none, we will turn to open discussion from the commission. Any items that have been brought forward today? Any questions, any discussion points? Commissioner Zylstra.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We've had some interesting discussions today, and particularly the one that Mr. Zoterik brought, I think raises a significant question for this group to consider. We can say we should be maintaining the charter, but the reason we have a Charter Revision Commission is to help update and keep it up to date. And Mr. Zoterich's point of view is we've almost doubled in population since the current charter was being envisioned. Since 1990, when people were kicking this off, the population was 101,461 in the city. So I think this is going to show up in other ways as well. I have in the past raised questions about the way we do the compensation of our elected officials. Is a system that maybe worked with 100,000 people, but is it still appropriate at 200,000? I'm not going to bring it up this year when there's the possibility of a mayor running for re-election. Don't need that kind of confusion on the ballot, perhaps the next round 2 years from now. But there are just a number of different ways I think we will see as we go through this that the charter can be adapted, adjusted, and its original principles maintained in light by making revisions in light of the changed population.
Further comments, questions? Commissioner Hayek.
In kind of tag teaming, I'd really appreciate prior to our next meeting and discussion upon that wonderful proposal that you gave us, some assistance as our legal department for the city looks at section 6.02, council districts and adjustment of districts. And it seems to me, and I don't know, so that's why I'm asking if we could get a legal opinion whether there isn't already a districting commission whose composition, term, appointment, and duties are spelled out within our charter. And it says very clearly that they shall, once the city's population has increased more than 50% since the last redistricting, that they propose a plan, have public hearings, set something forward, and I'm jumping through to the effect of the new city council districts and boundaries if this goes to a public vote. So I think it's a very interesting proposal. I believe that we might be overstepping our bounds because it appears as though in section 602, there is a districting commission, which I did not know about, but that's what we find out when we do these things, that is set out to do that. And where your proposal would probably be a much more appropriate suggestion, because it says they shall hold public meetings. They will present something to the commission. The commission then will bring it to the city council, and they'll go through a public vote. And so, you know, I think that's part of our job too, is to ascertain whether or not we actually have the authority to even look at this. So I would ask if we could have that as part of our next agenda. Thank you.
Further discussion?
Mr. Chair, I have an item for discussion, just,
Quaster.
and it relates somewhat to the public input discussion that we had earlier,
Okay.
which is, we have every meeting scheduled at 4 o'clock. And while the discussion is wonderful and public input, but if the commission, with this type of structure, we have to consider the practical components of timing here. We have staff, both with the facility itself and staff here, that we may have to revisit the time, that the start time for these meetings, because again, all of these things need to be vetted. It's also balanced with the public notice component when it comes to agenda items and motions that are being brought to take action when they're not listed on the agenda. It's something that the commission just needs to be aware of, those components of how these meetings are conducted. So, something to just discuss, and maybe it's an agenda item for next time, but we have to be mindful of that. And the 4 o'clock time, you know, there's always a balance there, but at one that just, again, there are a lot of components to the city we have to be mindful of, so.
No, very good reminder. Commissioner Zylstra, Hayek, and I know that this is easily one of the longest Charter Revision Commission meetings we've ever had. So appreciate the patience of the commission, appreciate very much the time and talent of our city staff. We will be more cognizant of that in the future and try and time manage ourselves a little better in terms of agenda. So any further discussion? Seeing none, the chair would entertain a motion to adjourn the meeting. There's been a motion to adjourn. Is there a second? All those in favor of adjournment, please signify by saying aye. Aye. We are adjourned.